When you see Dark Souls 2 on YouTube, it's usually alongside "in defense of", or that it sucks balls. I remember playing Dark Souls 2 when it first came out and really liking it, and I didn't understand why people hated it. What I was missing is that there are two versions of Dark Souls 2. The original Dark Souls 2 and Scholar of the First Sin, which I never played, and it's been very long since I played Dark Souls 2, so I remember very little from it. But I have now played Scholar of the First Sin, and I get it now. Scholar of the First Sin is pretty damn annoying. But also I had a mostly between okay and good time. Let's go over why and try to figure out why so many people hate this game. I spent a considerable amount of time watching people's videos about the game and reading opinions online, which is always a really good idea. So some of the stuff in this review will be in response to opinions or use those opinions as a jumping off point to go deeper. If you enjoy the video, like and subscribe, that's the best way to tell me to keep making these longer videos. Premise. The game immediately sets itself apart from the other Dark Souls games in the intro cutscene by focusing on you, the player, rather than the bosses you're going to fight. You are a hollow, a person afflicted by the dark sign, slowly losing your memories, forgetting who you are. You have come to Drangleic seeking a cure to hollowing, and then you jump into the big whirlpool. Wake up in a grassy field in front of a house, and then go into that house and get bullied by old ladies. And they teach you how to treat your hollowing with human effigies. Go further until you reach the only place I consistently remember from this game, Majula, and talk to the level up lady, who tells you to go see the king. And that's all the game gives you. I like this premise. It's different. And because of when it takes place, which the game doesn't tell you right now. It takes place between Dark Souls 1 and 3. It could be right after a hollow linked the fire in Dark Souls 1, or it could have happened after 1,000 hollows linked the fire after Dark Souls 1. Kingdoms have risen and fallen, and people don't remember the old gods like Gwyn anymore. It's a look at the world that is locked in the middle of this cycle of fading flame and then rekindling, and the effect it has on humanity. Gameplay. The clunky game feel. My first reaction to controlling my character in the game was, this feels weird. It was like there was a delay on my movements, it didn't feel as accurate as it should, just sluggish and clunky is the way I describe it. But after a while I got used to it and it felt more natural. But here's the thing. I don't know if it's because I got used to it or because I leveled up ADP, which is a really fun mystery stat you level up in Dark Souls 2. And it's a mystery because it's the main way to level up agility, and I'm pretty sure no one knows exactly how agility works. The most accepted information on what agility does is give you more invincibility frames when you roll. And I am saying this with very little confidence about being fully right, even though I have looked it up several times and watched many videos about Dark Souls 2 and its mechanics. A part of me believes in the theory that agility and adaptability, when you level them up, it makes your character feel better to control, because that's what I felt happened to me. When I leveled up ADP and attunement, which also gives you agility, controlling my character felt better. With agility, Dark Souls 2 is the only game where you have to level up a stat to make the game feel good. Starting out I didn't really want to keep playing, but as I leveled ADP up I liked it more. And later I didn't want to put the game down. But there are some things you had to get used to. Like if your character attacks forward, on a consecutive attack he cannot attack behind him. It will take your character a few attacks to turn the whole 180 degrees. Also, if you activate a swing and try to turn, then you will only be able to turn about 90 degrees give or take. This means effectively you have a 180 degree attack zone in front of you, compared to the 360 degrees in Elden Ring. So Dark Souls 2 is a less fluid game, and slower, because accuracy requires you to stop between attacks. Your character also just feels slow and constricted. I thought there was some limit on my movement, like I could only walk in 8 directions or something. There is apparently some dead zone issue with controllers in Scholar of the First Sin, but I tested this and I seem to move in all directions, but it also feels like the character snaps to certain directions. Specifically left, right, up and down, and right between those 4. Essentially, movement feels weird and the opposite of smooth. The rolling is in all directions though, which is good, and an improvement over Dark Souls 1. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. All of this summed up, the game is clunky and you will feel it. Especially if you're coming from the other Souls games. Some of it can be fixed with a mod or leveling up, and the others you will just have to get used to. I still never got used to pressing circle and running like a full second later. There might be some weird input delay. Stun locking is also a huge contributor to the clunky feel of the game. It's like 70% of the attacks that hit you will stun you, and you get attacked a lot, so you will get stun locked a lot. More on that later. Another contributor to how slow things feel is healing. It feels like it takes your character 5 seconds to take a sip of the Estus flask, and it stops you dead in your tracks. But life gems do not stop you. They only slow you. It takes a while to activate and then will slowly regenerate your health. And pretty early in the game you can buy a limitless supply of these. But since it takes so long to heal, that just means you will have to run further from enemies to heal, rather than a quick sip and back into the action. In short, controlling your character does not feel good, but will feel better over time. Still not good, though. Combat and enemies. With the clunkiness in mind, the combat is on the slower side, and you have to be more deliberate in what you do. Very deliberate, because if you mess up, you will get stun locked by the swarm of enemies this game will throw at you if you're not careful. Enemy spam is probably what you would most often hear people complain about in this game. And yes, it's true. There are a lot of enemies, but playing Elden Ring now, I would say that game also throws a lot of enemies at you sometimes, but you feel it a lot more in Dark Souls 2. It's more frustrating because your character can feel so slow. But this enemy spam is mostly avoidable if you take it slowly and carefully, and lure enemies out 1 to 2 at a time and kill them. It's a problem that has a solution, but the solution is pretty boring. It's slow and mindless. This method turns intimidating and frustrating areas full of enemies like the Iron Keep into boring areas, because it takes so long to clear them out, and you kinda have to. Because you aren't invulnerable when you go through fog gates, which means enemies can backstab you while you're stuck in the animation. This is also true for chests and ladders. So to me, killing all the enemies was necessary always. This game has another solution to the annoying enemy problem. If you kill an enemy 12 times, then he won't spawn anymore. So you could clear an entire level and then have a leisurely walk to the boss. But this is incredibly boring, and unfortunately sometimes I felt it was necessary. There are 3 reasons for this. One is just running out of heals, the second reason is that enemies now have a limited respawn, so if you lose the souls you have, then they're gone for good, which makes the souls you have way more precious, and makes you more risk averse. And the last reason is weapon durability. If it goes to 0, your weapon breaks and you can't use it. You can heal your weapon durability with a consumable item that I had like less than 10 of in the end of the game, so I didn't think that was reliable. The better option for me was the repair spell, and all spells in this game have limited uses since you don't have a mana bar. There are consumables to regenerate your spell uses, but I don't want to use my consumables on a boss run when I might die to the boss. So I felt the weapon durability mechanic forced me to go back to a bonfire, and it was just kinda tedious to manage, and didn't really add anything positive to the game, just an annoyance you have to constantly stop and manage. I will admit that clearing a level was a nice way to chill while I watch a show or a YouTube video on the second monitor. To me, the worst offender is all those red phantom invaders with 5000 health that do a lot of damage. It was never fun fighting them. It was just, how can I cheese this guy to end this as fast and painlessly as possible? In Dark Souls 2 I decided to try being a mage, since Dark Souls 2 has dark magic, hexes. And because I always play as sword and shield guy. And I quickly abandoned that to be a dark knight, or in actuality, sword and shield guy that can cast dark orb. Which translated to me answering enemy spam with dark orb spam. And that made most of the game really trivial, since the stun locking also applies to a lot of enemies, and I'd kill them before they ever got to me. Dark Orb does have limited range, the standard sorceries have more range, and I always felt my Dark Longsword did more damage. So the Dark Orb was mostly for level clear and doing damage to a boss, while I was psyching myself up for going into melee. The way this game handles enemies can lead to boredom, and the game does have a variety in enemies, they are just repeated so often that you get a little bored of them. I really wanna say that there was a basic enemy that I thought was fun to fight, but honestly I just can't think of one. Maybe the giant in the Old Iron King DLC? Him spewing lava on you made it more interesting at least. There were some fun bosses, but I'm saving that for later. Actually, there was one guy. I call him Mr. Looney Tunes. He's in 2 of the DLCs and he runs away from you to screw you over later. And in Elysium Lois, I spent probably 10 minutes chasing this guy around an area trying to kill him. And honestly, it was just funny. And I was smiling the whole time. There were some guys like the Hate Knights that were a little bit different, and they were more on the fun side to fight because they threw you some curveballs. But that felt rare. The lock-on felt a little iffy. Sometimes it wouldn't work when I thought it should work. I feel like I heard someone say that Dark Souls 2 encourages you not to use a shield. And hard disagree on that one. Dark Souls 2 encourages you to use a shield more than any other Souls game, because they made dodging way weaker early by tying it to a stat you have to level up, and if you get backed into a corner, a shield is more likely to help you than rolling. Enemies will sometimes track your movement really well, and will rapidly change the direction of their weapon mid-swing to hit you, if you, for example, rolled away. And this doesn't feel natural. It's annoying and makes the game harder to understand. And there's a similar feeling with the hitboxes here. And when I have seen people talk about this in Dark Souls 2, there is always someone that goes, Oh yeah, well, there's also a bad hitbox in Dark Souls 1. And yeah, that sucks. But there is a reason why bad hitboxes comes up so often in Dark Souls 2. It's because you really notice it here. It's because hits on you will register from your toe getting clipped by the enemy sword, or you getting hit when standing behind your enemy's weapon swing. So like, imagine he's doing a stab and pulls his sword back and then stabs forward. And during that you move into the area where the sword used to be, and that registers as a hit on you. This isn't a real example in the game, but it's stuff that's kinda like this. Stuff that feels like this. Like I shouldn't get hit there. I had a few of those, but they were uncommon. But often enough that I agree with the bad hitbox's sentiment. The mimic shouldn't be able to eat me when I stand next to it, far away from its mouth. And it certainly should not teleport my character that far into an animation. And I think that's a big culprit in why people think the hitboxes are bad here. The fact that your character will teleport into a grab animation. It breaks immersion and it's really frustrating. Because from where you were looking, the blade didn't hit you, or the hands didn't close around you. It's bad. I feel like I've been overly negative, but it's just the honest truth. But there is satisfaction to be found in the combat. It feels good to beat overwhelming odds. And there's the good weapon variety with some weapons having cool animations. Twin blades are cool and I really love the bone fist, even though I never used it. I also really love the idea of blue flame. It's a straight sword and a catalyst. A sword you can cast spells out of is always cool. Proper dual wielding was introduced in Dark Souls 2 and I love that, even though I never used it here. There were some upgrades from Dark Souls 1, but one step forward, two steps back. Overall, I feel like it's a downgrade from Dark Souls 1. Yes, 360-degree rolling is a significant upgrade, but Dark Souls 1 felt more fluid, and I prefer that. To me, of all the Souls games, this one plays the most like a survival horror game. I played Dark Souls 2 almost exactly like how I played Signalis, like a paranoid schizophrenic. And I think playing it like that will give you the best experience. I constantly said to myself, that wasn't that bad, when I went through the areas that people most consistently complained about. But hey, I used a lot of summons, which is more of a topic for the bosses, since summons were only really helpful in one area of the game. Level design. Let's talk about that one area. It's a significant jump forward, but I'm allowed to do what I want. The frigid outskirts. I've seen some posts that go along the lines of, oh yeah, you think this terrible area in Elden Ring is bad? Well, this was hell. And it's a picture of the frigid outskirts and just, really? The frigid outskirts? That one was the worst? They give you summons right at the start here. That's a pretty significant clue that you should use them. If you didn't use summons out of principle, then yeah, I get it. You are done, but I get it. It's basically a frozen desert that has a regular 30-second snowstorm that you won't be able to see in. And during that time, you just have to wait until it clears up and then head to one of the buildings that act as a waypoint. There are enemies around, but most of them are weak. But once you get a little further in, you start getting attacked by reindeer that shoot lightning. With the 3 NPC summons that I had, this was fine. Easy enough to dodge and deal with, but I get that it would be really annoying if you were solo. And they spawn with every cycle of the snowstorm, so you wanna deal with them quickly. But again, just summon to make it more tolerable. but it's a scale between boring and annoying challenge, and in the middle there is fun. So it's all about balancing it for yourself to find the fun. That's weird. You shouldn't have to balance it for yourself. The developers should have found a good, fun challenge. To me, this wasn't that bad. The gate section of the Iron King DLC was far worse. You activate a mechanism to open a timed gate, which opens the door to enemies who will block your path, and you get shot at by fireballs. And I never got this. I would always get killed, and it was really annoying. And I turned that section into a really boring and tedious one by just killing all the enemies 12 times. Both of these were a run to a boss with no bonfire in between. And yeah, I've always hated boss runs, so to me both of these sections are bad. It's just that one is more annoying. Both of these were from the DLCs, and there wasn't really any severely annoying area like this for me in the base game. The areas there were more easy to go through, except Iron Keep. I had to make that boring instead of annoying. It was a good XP grind though. The most common feelings I had were indifference, or just, I wanna get this over with. Please let me get a bonfire, don't screw me here. There were points where I kept going for the sake of completion, not because I was having fun. One of those points is Harvest Valley and most things that followed it. I just felt nothing going through it, or I was just slightly annoyed or bored. In best case, I had a small feeling of dread, that something around the corner would mess me up. With it being incredibly rare that I felt something was a fun area. And that would probably only be Eleum Lois, since I like the art design and lore there. Drangleic Castle was pretty cool too. The Iron King DLC and Eleum Lois were the only places where I started feeling my heartbeat. The fights had me locked in. They were good, but I did not like Crown of the Sunken King. It was just kinda the same boring dark wall the entire time. No NPC to talk to, just go through here, kill enemies and bosses, take the item and go home. With the only memorable thing besides the bosses being when you destroy coffins to make the ghosts take a corporeal form. That was cool. Speaking of the DLCs, why does going into the DLC have to be complicated and very hidden? I never would have found any of them without a wiki. All of the DLC doors have basically keys, and all those keys were in places that I would never think to check. Or I didn't even know that was an area. There are traps in the game, none of them as memorable as Sen's Fortress, but they're there. Chests with poison clouds and a boulder some enemies throw at you. You can shoot it with an arrow to make it go prematurely, and that was pretty cool. There are shortcuts here, they're pretty rare, but when I see them, I love them. There is a great variety in the levels here, as in there are a lot of different levels, but the level design didn't really grip me, most commonly being indifferent or bored, with a few areas that look really cool that are ruined by you having to go through it slowly, so you don't get gangbanged. So you take enemies out slowly with a bow, making it tedious. Just going through the motions. Now let's talk about some mechanics of varying importance. Let's start with some positives. In Dark Souls 1 I didn't want to bother upgrading too much beyond just 1 plus 15 normal weapon, because it was kinda tedious, but it's a big improvement here. It's easy to remember how many materials you need and even easier to get. So I was upgrading multiple weapons, and it's also way easier to get boss weapons. You no longer need to sacrifice a plus 10 weapon for a boss weapon, you just need the boss souls. and a lot of normal souls, and to find an NPC that's pretty hidden away, and then find it again in another place later. That part sucks, but it's still better. There's actually 2 boss weapon NPCs and both a little off the beaten path, but that's what wikis are for. Oh, and one of them is surrounded by explosive enemies that I had to kill 12 times to make it safe. And the other one has a spider gauntlet every time you wanna go there. Spawn at bonfire, get attacked by 10 spiders, run to NPC, and there will be 9 spiders following you through the door. Just why? The aged feather is a great item. You get it late in the game, but it lets you return to bonfires and you can use it again and again. And that's really nice, but I do wish I got it sooner. Dark Souls 2 has fast travel from the start, and it's way better than endless running. Dark Souls 1 got away with it because of the magical interconnectivity. That was the positives. FromSoft did a downgrade, and now you have a level up NPC again, instead of just leveling up at a bonfire, and that sucks. I had to block Dark Souls 2 in my firewall to avoid PvP, because I hate PvP in the Souls games. I think Dark Souls 3 is the one where I started having some fun with it. To me, PvP is disruptive rather than a fun event. This is why every other Souls game has an offline mode. Pharaoh's lockstones and fragrant branches are completely unnecessary and annoying. It's basically blocking off areas and you have to get branches or lockstones to open them. And they block off something very useful or interesting like 2 times. One of those times is one of the NPCs that sells you boss weapons, and the rest of the time it's trash. And you get a limited amount of these items, so you could end up locking yourself out of something very useful. NPC phantoms can make you stuck, but they will slowly move out of the way. I assume this would be a very funny way to grief online. It took very few souls to level up. I finished the game at level 180. This is a positive to me. It just means you'll get most of the stats into a good place by the end game. Fashion Souls is really good. Lots of cool armors and weapons. Here's a few of them. This has been the Fashion Souls segment. Bosses. Most of them are incredibly easy, like Dragon Rider, just walk to the left, and he will never hit you. And for Dragon Slayer, just walk to the right. It's just a lot of wait for them to have a little tantrum and then attack during the obvious attack window. It's a lot of just walking past their attack. Kinda felt more like a test of patience. And yeah, Dark Souls 1 had this issue too. But like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2 does have fun and interesting bosses that you have to dodge or have a mechanic you have to work around. Like the Rotten was a pretty good dodge fight, and the Smelter Demon had a damage aura that I had to use life gem regeneration for, and he had a lot of area attacks, so I had to run in and out a lot. The Gargoyle boss fight is probably the best example of the game just throwing enemies at you as difficulty. It's like 4 or 6 gargoyles, so I did not feel bad for summoning there. One of the more memorable fights is Vendrick, because you need to find the giant souls to make his health not so insane. And it's kind of the same thing as Gwyn. It's the king of this land and now he's a pathetic husk. It's an optional fight and it's okay, takes a bit long, but okay. So base game, most of the bosses I felt nothing. The halfway point between bored and having fun. And sometimes slightly annoyed with rare good ones. But the DLCs, that is when I started feeling my heartbeat. Starting with the worst, the Sunken King. Elana's Squalid Queen is a good boss with cool moves, but becomes extremely annoying when she summons Velstadt multiple times. Like, she summons Velstadt and he kicks your and your summon's ass, and then you kill him, and 10 seconds later she summons Velstadt again. Everything else is extremely manageable, it's just that one move, summoning Velstadt. That makes her suck. Sin the Poison Dragon is probably one of the better large enemy fights in the series in terms of seeing him. Very often with large enemies in the Souls games, it's a struggle with the camera, and you can't see what he's doing or what he's about to do. That happens in Elden Ring sometimes, but that didn't happen with Sin. I could always see what he's doing or just know what I should do. Like, if he flies up, I should run away. And I killed him solo because that was way easier than having summons. Because summons will boost boss health, giving them more time to mess you up, and also enhances Sin's worst quality. The fact that your weapon durability goes down really fast in that fight, and you will have to repair your weapon multiple times. And he moves around the arena a lot, and chasing after him for 10 minutes gets very old very fast. Spellcasting does really help with that. I didn't like the Sunken King, it sucks, and I would skip it if I ever played this game again. The Iron King DLC. Going through the level, I often said to myself, I hate this place. But the bosses, excluding Blue Smelter Demon, are really good. The Fume Knight and Sir Alon have telegraphed flashy moves that you memorize and dodge, and you trade damage with them. A puzzle of reflexes and memorization. That's what FromSoft's good at, and it's what I like. But with these I did hit the hitbox issue. There were moments where I thought that attack should not have hit me, and it was more apparent with Sir Alon. Specifically his stab move, the hitbox on that is nonsense. Despite that, I love these reflex heavy fights. Now, my favorite area, Eleum Lois. The King's Path fights were pretty good, but the real standout is the Unburnt King. You go through the entire level gathering soldiers for a fight with him, and then you go down into the pit with the soldiers, and your summons. And it's a battle between your soldiers and soldiers corrupted by the Flame of Chaos. And one by one your soldiers sacrifice themselves to freeze the portals that enemies come out of. And then everything goes quiet, and you look at the big portal, and it's like the Eye of Sauron. And then the Unburnt King stabs through it. It's one of, if not the hardest boss entry ever. And then it's dodge rolling stabby catharsis. But I love this fight because it's a tactical boss fight. You are strategically killing soldiers to make sure your guys live longer. Protecting your soldiers so you can fight the Unburnt King with the biggest possible advantage you could get. I don't remember a boss fight like this. I wish there was more like this. I loved it. It's the highlight of the entire game for me. But for the most part in the game the bosses are not memorable, just some dudes in armor. Totally lacking creative weird bosses like the Dragon Vagina. The only one I can think of is the Freakazoid in the Shrine of Amana, and I can't even remember his name. Dudes in armor isn't bad. It's bad because dude in armor is all they are. The dudes in armor in Dark Souls 1 were legendary knights. You probably knew next to nothing about them, but you did know that they had a name, and were probably important in this world. But here it's just Dragon Rider, costs 500 gold and 100 lumber, trained in the barracks, and then ends up in Control Group 3. Yeah, the bosses weren't good here. It's a struggle for me to even remember a handful in the main game, and 3 bosses in the DLCs being good doesn't excuse the rest being boring. However, did I cheat myself out of some good boss fights with summons? Maybe, but I don't really think so. I think dying and then having to do the long boss runs back again would have a far more negative impact than the possible positive impact of a solo boss fight. Scholar of the First Sin versus the original game. From looking online, the main takeaway with the changes Scholar added is a lot of enemies. Like all those rat phantoms I didn't remember, and a host of normal enemies. Basically enemy spam. But then I see conflicting information, that some areas were spammier in the original game. There is this channel called Domo 3000 that has a lot of examples of Scholar of the First Sin being easier than the original game. And then I find a thread on NeoGAF where a guy says the original is the nicer experience with less enemy spam. Basically me trying to look up the differences amounted to nothing, until I found this list of changes. It's much better than subjective threads and curated clips, and I have now skimmed it, and the short answer is Scholar added a lot of enemies to some areas, and in some areas they removed enemies or changed it up to be nicer. But main issue for me is they added a lot of NPC invaders with 5000 health that take forever to kill, and I hate that. At the end of the day, Scholar of the First Sin felt pretty spammy, and this is a review focused on Scholar. Scholar does change some things to be nicer, but it also introduces a bunch of annoyance. Look at how nuanced I'm being right now. I've gone soft. If you were wondering which version of Dark Souls 2 to pick, honestly, flip a coin. On the DS2 subreddit, I most often saw Scholar recommended, but I found testimonials of people talking about how much they preferred the original. I liked the original when it came out, and I'm not that fond of Scholar now that I've played it. But it's been years since I played the original, so take that with a kilogram cube of salt. A lot of those annoying red phantoms aren't there in the original game, so just for that I would recommend the original over Scholar. And getting into the DLC is simpler. Story. The way FromSoft stories work is that you can get into them and find something kinda deep and meaningful, or completely ignore it and just kill bosses for the simple reason that they are in your way. The story works by giving you a little direction, and then you piece together what happened in this land by talking to NPCs you meet on the way and through reading item descriptions. And I don't have the patience to properly piece it together. I exclusively listen to the NPCs and get the gist of things, because usually the voice acting is pretty good. And then I watch lore videos for 30 hours and go, oh, wow, the story is pretty deep. There's also the issue of NPC stories being hidden, or I just lose track of the NPC. Like, I have no idea what happened to Lucatiel. I met her twice and then never again. So I probably missed her somewhere. And in terms of something being hidden, I killed Man-Scorpion Tark because I didn't know about the Ring of Whispers. You need the Ring of Whispers to be able to talk to him. I thought you had to wake him up with a melee attack. So obviously I kept beating him until he died. I was kinda right though. He did wake up. But nearby I managed to befriend a bodiless head by killing his body nearby, and that was pretty cool. I've said that my favorite area is Aleum Lois, and a big contributor to that is Alsana, the queen of the area. She will just tell you pretty much exactly what is going on in the area, and I like that. If you are the type of person who enjoys a story that is almost an investigation in how you uncover it, kinda like a horror artificial reality game, like the Mandela Catalog, then you will enjoy this. But if you want a normal story where people talk to each other with drama and stuff, then probably not. There are characters in the story that will tell you kinda what's going on, but I don't think you should be here for the story. But conversations with characters are few and far between, and memorable conversations even rarer. Let's talk about what the story actually is about. The game is kinda bad at conveying the story for the most part, but luckily wikis and YouTubers exist. Spoiler warning, skip it if you don't want to get spoiled. Spoilers! Like I said in the premise, this game is just another cycle of the flame fading and then rekindling, and nothing has really changed in the cycle since Dark Souls 1. But what you do learn about it in Dark Souls 2 is that Gwyn kindled the first flame for his own power, and because he hated/feared humanity. And he gaslit them into being kindling for the fire. And that this cycle really sucks. You learn this from some guy I met in a dark place, and from Altia, King Vendrick's brother. And the two of them were trying their hardest to find a cure for the hollowing, and none of it worked. Except maybe just finding ways to keep the hollowing at bay. Treatments, but no cure. And Vendrick ended up as a brain-dead husk, and Altia became a burning bush. God appeared to Moses as a burning bush, by the way. That's your religious symbolism for the day. Altia at least did figure out that linking the fire was responsible for the hollowing. It's possible that if Altia and Vendrick got to work on it for longer, they might have found a cure for terrible fantasy Alzheimer's, if not for the real message of the game. Women ruin everything. Okay, not really. It's more like 3 in 4 women will ruin your life, but the 4th will be the best thing that ever happened to you. This goes back to the Dark Souls 1 DLC. When we kill Manus the Anus, he splits into 4 fragments. The 4 queens we see in Dark Souls 2. The queens in the Iron King and Sunken King DLCs and King Vendrick's queen do their best to mess up the kingdom for their own power. But the queen in Eleum Lois does not, because the king of Eleum Lois treated her with kindness. Which kind of implies that the other kings were not so kind. Eleum Lois was built on top of the old chaos, and the old chaos started acting up. And the unburnt king decides to be the biggest badass there is, and just jump down there and kill all the demons to save his land. And he asks the queen to freeze everything or something like that, or maintain a frozen storm. And she does that. She was gonna do that forever until we came. And she did that because she loved her king. She was Manus' incarnation of fear, and because of the king's kindness, she conquered her fear, and was a loyal and good wife. So the real message of the game is be kind, and you will get good things. The ending of the game is inconclusive, nothing really happens. You just kill all the bad guys and become the strongest. Maybe you become king or just walk away. Conclusion. What I like about Dark Souls 2 is that it's so different from the other FromSoft titles. I like that FromSoft experiments with their games to see what works. It's just that this time around, in Scholar of the First Sin, it isn't working for me. There was a part of the game where I did get into it, I was feeling it. While before I had been slightly annoyed, I was having a bit of fun. And then it just got boring. Just felt too slow. Too many uninspired bosses and uninspired levels. It was missing that special sauce. Missing that artistic weirdo Japanese thing. It felt clunkier than even Demon Souls. And there's a lot of annoyance here that outweighs the fun you could have. I really wanted to like Dark Souls 2. I came into this game thinking, let's prove the haters wrong. but then the game proved me wrong. I would only recommend playing Dark Souls 2 if you've already played the other Souls games, except maybe Demon Souls. Currently my ranking from worst to best is Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 1 and then Elden Ring at the top. I'll add Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne when I get around to them, which will be much later, because I need a break from Souls after Elden Ring. But I give Dark Souls 2 about a 6 out of 10. It wasn't completely miserable and it wasn't that much fun. At the end here, I wanna say that most of my research on the game was me trying to figure out why this game was so weird, or seeing if other people felt this way. And in the end, just me playing the game and testing it was enough for the review. So I kinda lied in the intro. The research got heavily overshadowed by my own experience and opinions, because I objectively have the best ones. The rest of the Souls games will get reviewed sometime in the future. For now, I want to get back to stuff like Project Zomboid, Shadows of Doubt, We Who Are About to Die, Everspace 2, indie games that surprise you with just how good they are, and are a lot of fun to make videos on. Subscribe for that and have an okay day.